So thank you very much, Matt Weston, for joining me today on this podcast on behalf of Wright Hassall. I'm super excited. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you joining and discussing a really important topic that's very, very close to my heart. And I know it's a topic which actually all businesses need to be mindful of. And it's a struggle for employees who don't really know what to do and how to deal with it. So the topic, as we know today, is going to be about bullying and harassment. It's a subject which I've been campaigning about for the last 2 years because I don't believe there's enough awareness about what bullying is and how it impacts individuals. But I also don't feel that businesses really quite understand what bullying and harassment is, what they can do, and actually the impact it has on their business overall. So with that in mind, I wanted to really ask you some questions today about your thoughts, and also to talk about some of my findings and actually what you think about them.
Sure. Well, Tina, thanks so much for having me join you today. And can I just say, all credit to you for taking this up as an issue and really championing the problem that we have in workplaces and to Wright Hassall. For the focus that they've allowed you to give it. So that's terrific. And very happy to join you and to answer any questions you may have. But I'm sure we'll enjoy the discussion.
Yes, great stuff. Thank you. So just to start off on what I've discovered really from my research over the last 2 years is that there's a massive underreporting and a massive lack of understanding as to what bullying and harassment is. And there's a wider impact to businesses because bullying and harassment can affect morale, it can affect productivity, it can lead to silent resignations or lots of turnovers. But I think what I'm keen to do ultimately is end workplace bullying, but that might be a bit further down the road, because to end it, people need to understand what it is and how it impacts individuals and how it impacts businesses. So I wanted to ask you really, what does workplace bullying mean to you, and why do you feel strongly about this subject as well?
Well, it can take many forms, can't it? I think a lot of people just assume that bullying is a physical thing, or it is a verbal thing, but it can manifest itself in so many different ways, and that's where I think clearly larger organisations probably a much better place. They have more capacity, maybe more experience. Not necessarily the case, but typically. So they're much more conversant with what form bullying can take, and they have maybe larger HR departments. Whereas smaller organizations, new businesses, maybe it's more of an issue. Perhaps people are genuinely ignorant in the truest sense of the term, just not aware really of what form bullying can take. So I think exploring this and bringing it to life so people understand what forms it takes is a really important initiative.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, as an employment lawyer, what I've noticed, because I act for lots of businesses, that even with the larger people teams or HR teams, the teams can sometimes be removed from what's actually happening on the ground. And I think the HR teams, some teams will call themselves people teams. They do have a challenge in front of them, because what they have to get is buy-in, and buy-in is so important to prevent bullying and harassment. And what I mean by that is everyone needs to have an understanding of what it is to be able to prevent it. Unfortunately, there will be organisations which will, for example, only bring that awareness training to a certain level of management within the organisation. But actually, for me, what I've realised is that to prevent it, everyone in that organisation needs to have an understanding of what bullying and harassment is.
Yeah.
One of the things that I did realise, and I'm just picking up on what you've said, is that actually pre-COVID, I didn't really read many Teams messages or Slack messages or WhatsApp group messages. And you're 100% right, Matt. You know, bullying takes so many forms. It's not just the verbal action of someone said something to someone else. It can happen through non-verbal communication as well. And increasingly, because people are more comfortable in a WhatsApp group or in a Teams conversation, I actually think that it's blurred what people think bullying is even further. Um, in my research findings, I find it interesting that there is still a huge underreporting of what of people wanting to go to HR or even knowing what to do. I know that Labour wants to really focus on workplaces and has placed a lot of emphasis on making changes better for employees. What would you love to happen over the next few years?
Well, I think giving this the true focus, because I think that for many people and organizations, if you don't address this, if you don't create the right culture in the workplace, then that's to the detriment of the organization, but obviously to the individual as well. And that is a loss for both sides. I say both sides, it shouldn't be sides at all, but it is actually about getting the best out of us as individuals, but how we work collaboratively, because quite clearly, when you work together on things, as you do as an organization here, you can achieve great things. You look at this, and it's one of the largest law firms in this part of the West Midlands. So it's been very successful. The culture does succeed. But making a workplace where people feel valued and understood, and that they feel that they're contributing, participating in a collective endeavor is so important. And sadly, too many organizations don't start from that position. So creating that right environment is important. I think an ongoing permanent dialogue really with members of teams and departments and so on, interdepartmental conversation, how you're working together, how you're getting the best out of individuals and what their ambitions, what they think they can bring to the workplace is so important. It's essentially about value. But if you don't do that, as you know, Tina, the negatives are so damaging for the individual, but for the organisation too.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the statistics that came out from my research findings was that 33% of the surveyed individuals wouldn't recommend their employer. And I think that's really quite a big finding. And that'll be for many reasons, but my survey was very much focused on bullying and harassment. And so what that's telling me, if employees feel unhappy in their workplace or they feel unsupported in challenging bullying and harassment, that they have a big voice when they leave because they won't recommend an organisation. In terms of culture, it should, for me, I feel that all organisations should have it on the top of their agenda because culture impacts everything else in that business. It impacts staff retention, it impacts recruitment, it impacts productivity. So getting the culture right is really important, and it shouldn't just be a buzzword for employers to think about once a year, an annual event, for example. It should be something that's continuously monitored and continuously reviewed. I have noticed that those organisations which make culture a prominent feature of their business have far more long-serving employees and a much more happier workforce as well.
So it's so true, and I think organisations often forget how important it is to retain people. And of course, there will always be some churn in an organisation.
Of course, yeah.
People will think, oh well, I see my future in a different place, and it can be a different organisation, or it can be that they choose to take a different route, and so on. But the fact is, people have come to work for you. Now that's a decision. It's a relationship they've entered into. And you need to respect that as an employer. And as I say, talk about valuing people. But once you have someone in the organization, you don't really want to lose that person. You don't want to lose them after a couple of weeks or months or whatever, or even perhaps a couple of years, because they build knowledge.
Correct.
They build networks within the team and so on, the organization, and that's a really valuable thing because there's this compound knowledge of people, which is of huge value to the organization. So if you don't retain the people, you then have to retrain. They have to build a network.
Absolutely.
So there is this kind of schism in the organization where you start all over again, and that's very costly. Likewise, if you have people that have been bullied, they feel really upset, disenchanted, disaffected. They then take time out, maybe mental health issues that relate to that as well, or worse. And then you lose that person for a period of time or permanently. These come at great cost, clearly to the individual involved, but also to the organization. And that's why it's such an important issue that you're addressing.
Yeah. I mean, lots of people who do feel bullied, they will take time off on long-term sick. But you're quite correct to mention the impact in mental health and well-being, because actually those individuals that have encountered bullying, and it doesn't need to be a series of bullying, one act can make someone feel the same way that years of bullying might make someone feel, because it's how that individual feels.
Yeah.
But it can result in long-term sickness absence, but it can also result in employees resigning. And unfortunately, it can knock confidence. So it will knock their confidence to the extent that they feel that they can't return to work in even in a different organisation. But I think, from my research and findings, and actually talking to lots of employers about it, I don't think there's a desire to not tackle it. So what I've discovered is that there is there's a lack of understanding as to the different forms of bullying. So in my survey, I asked, for example, do people think shouting is bullying? The result was more people felt that shouting was not bullying, which I found very strange. An abrupt email, the respondents that I surveyed felt perhaps wasn't bullying. So what I'm about is making sure that if people understand the different forms of bullying and harassment, and an employer can understand how to tackle it, regardless of job title within an organisation, that should significantly reduce bullying within the workplace and should increase a better culture for everyone else. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, Matt, is that, what would be your advice to businesses in relation to what they should do to tackle workplace bullying?
Well, I think it comes fundamentally down to an appreciation of what bullying looks like, what forms it takes. And it needs to come from the very top of an organization. So they need to make themselves very familiar with the different forms of bullying. Here we are in the 21st century.
Yeah.
It's different to maybe what it would have been 30, 40 years ago. And, just listening to you talking, Tina, I sort of reminded of some of this nonsense that we hear in certain arenas about what is woke and this is woke. It's nonsense. This is absolutely fundamental. It's about making people feel valued and appreciated in the workplace. This is not some sort of snowflake thing. It is absolutely about everyone having a part to play, and that there aren't individuals who use the workplace to play out their own particular issues, which is essentially what bullying is. But to come back to your question, it has to come from the top.
Correct.
And then you have to create that culture within the organization, give the training to others so that the management teams then know what this looks like, and then it's fed out through the organization too. But it has to be set out clearly as part of the organization's statement, really, of how they behave, how they operate. And you might then ask me, do I have a statement? I don't, and it's a very small team that I work with, and and maybe it's something that I should look at.
Mm-hmm.
But you do, whether you set it out clearly like that or you live by it, you should certainly live by it. But I think also you should set it out about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the not acceptable is far easier. And I think the training that you can do, there is such good stuff out there about what microaggressions look like.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people are just not so familiar of what forms these take and what it's like to be on the receiving end of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be a gender maybe related issue or other type of aggression. And therefore, I think spelling it out to people about what that looks like is a really important thing. So that's where I'd start.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that I deal with a lot of what I call misconceptions. So, I frequently hear whether I'm defending an action on behalf of an employer or I'm actually being instructed by an employee. But there's this word banter, which I'm sure you've heard, but people will use that.
Seems to be a male word. Is it a male word? I don't know. Do women use it as much?
I think they do actually.
Okay.
So I mean, probably maybe not as much, but it seems to be this hidden defence to behaviours.
Yep.
If you've done something and you didn't mean it, it was banter, so that makes it okay. And it's those misconceptions which I'm trying to really tackle. The other common misconception is, I've always got on well with that person. Why would they suddenly feel a particular way now? Or what I do hear, unfortunately, sometimes with businesses is, well, he's really good at his job, or she's really good at her job, so I prefer not to upset that because that's really important to me. But actually, what should be important to an organisation is the well-being of all their employees, and that's and the culture of the organisation, and that really does start from the top, as you've stated. What I noticed from my findings is, with all the training that I can deliver, what we really need to tackle is a fear of reporting, because you can do everything right. You can have the correct policies in place. You can have delivered the right awareness training, but if there is a fear of reporting, then bullying will be contained in that organisation and not dealt with.
Yeah.
And I found it interesting, really, because it was the main reasons people feared reporting was that they would suffer a detriment, or they had no confidence in the reporting process or the matter being dealt with. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the side that side of it is so important. So just what you're saying about banter, I think it's an easy excuse for people to play. The familiarity of colleagues, another reason, I think, and that's where the kind of reset is important in an organization, is to say, yeah, okay, this is what you may have thought about banter, or you thought about your colleagues and so on, and therefore somehow this is permissible to continue behaving like that. And clearly it's not. I mean, the reporting side is really important. So it's something, even in my very small team, that I will say that if there's an issue, you must speak to. You can't necessarily say that to me. If you don't feel you can say it to me, then you say it to this other person, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Because we all have different relationships and so on, and sometimes you feel it's easier to converse with a particular person, particularly on a personal matter.
Yes.
Because there can be all sorts of bullying, there's sexual bullying too.
Yeah.
That we should perhaps, if you want to sort of come on to, but it's a big issue. And my workplace in Parliament, that has been a massive problem amongst certain individuals. That you need to be able to know that you can raise this issue in a safe place, with a safe, a person that you can confide in. So that's really important. But just as you were talking, Tina, I was thinking about a really good practice, and I was thinking about when I was I visited Toyota up in Derbyshire not so long ago in August, and just looking at how the management and the union work together. So it's a large employer, obviously.
Yes.
Thousands of people work there. But just how they have such a good working relationship between employer and union, and how they're getting the best out of everyone through that strength of relationship. So the unions have an important part to play too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The more collaboration that unions and workforces and management have, I can only ever see that being a good, positive outcome, as opposed to, there being disjoint between the different organisations or individuals within an organisation. So, I mean, you mentioned, Matt, about sexual harassment, and yes, thankfully, there is now a stricter preventative duty on employers. And in reality, employers don't want to know or learn of sexual harassment work happening in the workplace. And my experience of dealing with employers is that they are mortified if that sort of allegation surfaces. But what I really like about the new legislation, which is due to come into force, is that it does place more preventative duties on employers. And I think keeping that alive, particularly with all the recent media coverage about sexual harassment as well, keeping that alive means it, again, a bit like bullying, stays at the forefront of an employer's mind. I think the days where businesses just had to focus on productivity are well gone, to be honest. And today, in order to have a successful business, you have to put people and culture at the top of the agenda, and that includes ensuring that you're constantly looking at your policies, you're constantly delivering training, you're challenging yourself if you are doing enough as a business owner to ensure you have a workplace which is safe of bullying and harassment.
I think the new deal for working people that we're bringing in, that you're alluding to, I think is a really important piece of legislation. And I'm just sort of reminded also of, the fact that we live in an era where people are using social media, using these group chats and so on freely, and they think that's their safe space.
Yeah.
But there is stuff that goes on there which is pretty shocking, can be, and then somehow what they put on wider social media, and the boundaries seem to have blurred. And so what they seem to think is perfectly acceptable to say out on social media, then they may not have said previously in a workplace, or but they sort of they're forgetting, because that behavior has gone unremarked, or unprotested, uncontested on social media. So they think that they can say these other things elsewhere. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in addressing that. And I think for employers, sort of how people behave in these other areas, particularly if there's a workplace, group chats and so on, is really important too.
Yeah, I agree.
Because, I guess the point about I'm talking about sexual harassment and so on, but protected characteristics, and recognizing that that we live in, at long last, there is recognition we live in a very diverse society, and really important that we not just simply respect that, but celebrate that too. And therefore, sort of what these forms of bullying can look like to members of our community take different forms, and therefore addressing homophobia, misogyny, racism, and so on. It's so important.
I 100% agree. I just want to say thank you. So I could carry on talking about this subject, Matt, because I am super passionate about this subject. And I really appreciate that you've come and shared your views with me today. So I'd like to just say, on behalf of Wright Hassall, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the invitation. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.